Welcome to the new world of work. I'm Adi Ignatius, editor-in-chief of Harvard Business Review. And thanks for joining us. If you like this content, I urge you to check out our flagship podcast, IdeaCast, available wherever you get your podcasts. So as you know, most weeks on this show, I interview a business leader, usually a CEO, and talk to him or her about the biggest challenges that they're facing in the new world of work. Today, I have a coach and someone who has been in the spotlight lately. So he's Gregg Berhalter, who coaches the U.S. men's soccer team, or rather who coached the U.S. men's soccer team in the recent FIFA World Cup. The team, you'll recall, got out of a tough first-round grouping with a memorable victory over Iran before losing to the Netherlands. Berhalter was a professional soccer player himself for 17 years, mostly in Europe, and he played for the U.S. in the 2002 World Cup. Since 2011, he's been a coach in Europe and in the U.S., and for the past 4 years, he's been head coach of the U.S. national team. Now, in the past couple of weeks, he's been under another kind of spotlight. Berhalter's decision to limit the playing time of one of his young players prompted the player's parents to try to blackmail him by threatening to expose an incident more than 3 decades ago where Berhalter and a woman got into a fight. This is the ultimate soccer mom nightmare. Berhalter took the initiative and, with that woman, who became his wife, put out a statement acknowledging that, yes, Gregg had kicked his wife in that incident when he was 18. They'd gotten past it. Indeed, they've been married for 25 years and have 4 kids. Gregg asked whether, given all the noise around this, HBR wanted to cancel or postpone the interview. I'm thrilled to go ahead with it, and I'm pleased that he's still willing to do it. So please join me, Gregg Berhalter.
Hey, Adi.
Hi, really glad you're doing this. So, I want to start with a controversy, and I sort of outline, the bare bones of what happened. But, let me ask you, what are you feeling about this? What have you learned from all of this?
I think it's sadness. Our entire family is saddened by these events. Something we want to move forward from. As we said in the statement, it was something that we didn't hide from back then, and we weren't prepared to hide from it now. And that's why we issued this statement. It's actually the events of that night, 31 years ago, and the lessons learned from that basically set the foundation for our relationship moving forward. And it's a loving relationship, a devoted relationship, and we have 4 amazing kids to show for it. I think, the worst part of it for me is, my heart aches for my wife, because it was her story to tell, if she chose to or not. And, and that's what, it just really, really saddens me. But it's moving forward, and that's the way we have to look at it together as a family. The family's been amazing, and it's taking it one day at a time and moving forward. And, a big reason for doing this show is because I committed to doing it. We committed to doing this before all this stuff happened, and I wasn't going to back down from it, because I said I would do it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're doing that. To say, I met Gregg actually at it was an event, a summit put on by the Howe Institute, and it was at that event that Gregg talked. This is somewhat esoteric, but it was Chatham House rules when Gregg was doing an interview, and that pretty much means off the record, and it's just meant to be a safe space where people could talk. And I listened to you talk. You didn't throw any of your players under the bus. We all walked away not even thinking about individual players or anything like that. So I think this all got wrongly reported and kind of misreported, and anyway, and suddenly, your life is in a different place. But I really appreciate you're doing this. Is there anything else you want to say about any of this stuff? It doesn't look like you're giving a lot of interviews, but anything else you want to say, just sort of for the record at this point?
No, I appreciate you asking, but it pretty much speaks for itself. The statement speaks for itself, and like I said, we just take it one day at a time, and hopefully, we look forward to the day that we can move forward from this.
So I did notice, so the U.S. Soccer is, they've said they're doing an investigation. They've, named a temporary head coach for the U.S. team. would you like to stay on as coach of the men's team?
It's a fantastic group of players, a super high potential in this group. And, we're competing in the World Cup in North America in 2026. So, it would be an amazing challenge for this team. When we started in 2018, we wanted to change the way the world views American soccer. And I think when you ask around the world now about our team, the world sees us in a completely different light. But now it's about being able to take that next step. And that next step is doing something that, no U.S. team has ever done. And that's, get to the semifinals and see what happens from there. So there's a lot of, great challenges involved. And, of course, I'd like to continue in my role.
So if you just joined us, I'm speaking today with Gregg Berhalter, who coached the U.S. men's soccer team at the FIFA World Cup that was just concluded. If you have questions for Gregg, put them into the chat. I get that people are very passionate about soccer and very passionate about what's happening. But, if you put constructive questions in there, we will try to get to some of them later in the show. I'd love your view. So we all watched, and it was thrilling. And, as I said, that was an incredible match against Iran, and then, heartbreak against the Netherlands. Are you happy with the U.S. team's performance in the World Cup?
What I'd say is you very rarely go into an event like that or anything where there's just complete alignment, between the entities in your team. And when I'm talking about staff, players, organization, we were completely aligned with what we wanted to achieve with our vision. And there was a beautiful thing to watch. When I think about how focused the guys were, how determined they were, the staff, how hardworking the staff was and dedicated to making sure everything was right. I mean, there was meticulous planning that went into this month-long event. And because of that, I think it was a big success. We didn't trail in the group stage. We scored first in 2 of the games. We didn't give up many chances. The whole thing was, I think, an eye-opener to the rest of the world of what the U.S. can do. And by the way, in those 4 games that we played, we played the 4 youngest lineups in the World Cup. So again, when I mentioned the potential of this group, it's something that's exciting for U.S. soccer fans. And, this was the first step for this group in terms of what they can do in the future.
So you just mentioned there was a lot of talk during the World Cup that this was a relatively young U.S. team. What does that mean as a coach when you've got talent, but it's kind of young and relatively inexperienced talent? What does that mean for you trying to lead this group?
Well, not all the time, but generally, experience plays a huge role. And you need guys that have been through it before, that know what this is about and know how to win these knockout games. Knockout games in the World Cup are very difficult. And but on the same side, when you have a young team, you get a group of guys that are fearless, and that's what we were. I think we debuted 18 or 19 players in the World Cup, and these guys, they weren't scared. I mean, that was the thing that struck me the most. Is they've played in big games before. Okay, they haven't played in a World Cup, but they played in big games, and they were ready to go out there and apply everything that they've learned throughout their lives in soccer on the field, and they did a great job.
So when you announce your starting lineup, 11 guys, you've got, 14 who, are probably relatively unhappy in the locker room. How do you ensure that every player, continues to buy into your vision and feels valued even when you've made a tough decision like this?
That's a great point. And one of my opening slides in the presentation to the group, it was character versus talent, or talent versus character, the other way around. And what I said to the guys is, every one of you is going to be called on to help this team be successful at the World Cup. And there are going to be different ways that you're called upon, but each and every one of you will be called upon. It's just, to me, it comes down to, recognition, recognizing guys that aren't playing, starring roles, and recognizing the little things they do. We had some tremendous examples of guys that didn't play 1 minute in the tournament being some of the most impactful guys off the field. And, that's just a wonderful story. And when I talk about this alignment that we had, that the group had, That's what I mean. And so for us as coaches, it starts with communication, letting people know their roles. And one thing this formula I like to use is happiness equals expectations over reality. So if you talk to people about what their role is, and that's what their role is, they're going to be happy. It's when that proportion or that ratio is out of whack where you get unhappiness.
So as a coach, you're always in the spotlight, and any sports fan thinks they know better than you, and you lose, people will call for your heads. Now you've got the added spotlight of this controversy swirling around. If you say you block it out, I'm not going to believe you. So my question is going to be, how do you, as a coach, as a person, how do you kind of keep focus, keep doing what you're doing when you just got a lot of noise around you, and a lot of it is threatening and is angry, and how do you do it?
I think it's leading with values. If you're comfortable with what you represent every single day and what you're putting out every single day, the how of what you're doing, then you can be comfortable. And it's not nice to hear negative comments about you. But when I took this job in 2018, December 2018, the first year it affected me, and it hurt me. And then as you're in the job, you realize that this is part of that spotlight. When you're coaching the United States national team, it's a huge spotlight, and there's a lot of people that love you and a lot of people that don't love you, and that's just part of it. So, what I'd say, Adi, and you gotta believe me here, is that it's not nice, but you count on who you are, and you don't let it get to you as much.
How would you characterize your own leadership style, coaching style, and to what extent has that evolved in the years that you've been a senior coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think anyone who's in a leadership position, you're gonna evolve, and you keep improving, and you're gonna keep trying to get better every day. But I think what I've learned from the start to where I am now is it's about inclusion. It's about communication. It's about having clear values. I rely on the group around me. I rely on getting help. I think listening is very important. It's getting feedback all the time. And I think when you lead like that, people have the feeling that they're in it also. And that's the type of environment that I want to create, where people are pulling for each other, but they feel like their actions have a direct correlation to the team's success.
So I want to go quickly to a question from the audience. This is from Alex from North Carolina, and who's acknowledging that as a leader, as a coach, you need to gain the trust of your players. So given what's happening, what has happened with the Reinas, how do you think about rebuilding the trust that you had when everyone's sort of getting bombarded by media reports and whatever, and trying to understand, okay, what's up? What are your thoughts about kind of preserving and rebuilding trust?
Again, I think that is a great point. And trust is something that takes a long time to build, but can go away really quickly. And what I would say is that you have to be consistent with who you are, and you have to have clear values. And if you are, people can see they can see that, and they can trust that consistency is there. But it certainly is, something that we take very seriously. I take very seriously. My bond with the players is very strong, and it's about maintaining that bond. And I think that the players and the staff, know who I am and know what I stand for.
So another related question. This is from Malcolm. From Massachusetts, who, I asked how you block out the noise, but, what are strategies you use to help your athletes quiet all the kind of noise, the distraction, the media, the naysayers, the pressure? How do you help them at the kind of high level that your guys are playing at?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the starting point is them not looking for validation on social media. And, there's this athlete syndrome almost, where these high level players, they grow up And they're always told they're great soccer players, they're great soccer players, they're great soccer players. And that's what they keep hearing. And what it does is it connects their identity to what they're doing on the field. So if they don't play a great game, they could perhaps think that now they're less of a person because they didn't play great. And what I try to tell them is we value you for who you are as a person. And that's the most important thing. We know you're trying to play great, and sometimes you may not play great. And for us, it's how do we give them the confidence? How do we prepare them in the most thorough way that they can go out on the field and be confident in their performance? And so it's not getting validation from social media is number one, and then preparing the players to preparing them in a way that they gain confidence from the preparation, and then not attaching their performance to who they are as people, because they're wonderful people. And I'm sure you saw examples of that during the World Cup. They just blew me away with their poise and with their consistency throughout the whole tournament.
Yeah, I mean, it was moving, I think, in particular after the Iran game, seeing your guys, hugging some of the Iran players who had just lost. I mean, it just seemed there was
and that's real, Adi. That's who they are. That wasn't some, these guys care so much and love each other so much. Like, that's literally who they are. And that action, when I think about before the game, the press conference and the way Tyler Adams handled the press conference. And then when I think about, the lead up to the game, it was trying to take, we're in professional sports and it's about winning. And we desperately wanted to get to that next round. But it wasn't about making enemies of Iran. It was about just saying, okay, here are two teams that are going to be competing. We want to compete to our best of our ability to win this game. And you saw that afterwards. We weren't enemies with Iran. We had a lot of sympathy for what they were going through, and we showed that after the game.
Yeah, well, it was as somebody watching on TV, it was really apparent. It was moving. So, you seem to kind of represent a category of kind of empathetic coaches that probably dominate, the landscape of CEOs, of coaches these days, where there's, sort of more hugging than yelling. People in my generation, sometimes fondly remember teachers, coaches, bosses who could be tough, really tough, but then at the end of the day taught us a lot. And, my question is, is there still a place for that kind of leadership, or would that just be rejected by, in your case, the players who look to you for leadership?
I'm not sure. I'm really not. I think there is a generational shift where the players need more communication, more information. There's a general feeling of wanting to be tied into this common cause, this common goal, which is completely normal. And I think we're at a great spot. I'd much rather be able to collaborate with the players than, just stick to staff here, players there. But it's interesting, when I was a player, like, it was a good thing not to talk to the coach. If you weren't talking to the coach, you were doing something right. And now it's completely different, but I like where it's gone, because I believe leaders, have the responsibility to communicate. I think they have the responsibility to take feedback. And that's, to me, the sign of good leadership. You're able to listen and include people.
So, interesting thing, we talked about this before, Gregg. Your godfather is Carl Yastrzemski, who, for viewers who don't know that name, was one of the great baseball stars in the U.S. in the 1960s and 70s. I'm wondering if you ever had conversations with him about kind of, big time sports then versus now. You mentioned how social media has become something that people cope with, but have you ever compared, or with Yastrzemski or other people of that era, just how this world has changed in terms of how players need to kind of engage with media, with fans, then versus now? Is that any of this?
Yeah, I never talked to Yaz about that. But, to me, he's just a classic example of, hard work and discipline can get you good things. And that was Yaz. When you hear the stories of him growing up, it was hard work and discipline, and that led the way. And, as a player, you don't play for one team for that long if you're not, disciplined and hardworking and talented. So, he was a great example to us as kids, of what it took to really reach a high level.
Yeah. Well, I had a poster of Carl Yastrzemski above my bed as as a little boy.
Which
Who was
one was
hoping.
it? Was he batting, or was he on first or in the outfield? Where was it?
It was the classic batting.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
stance, huh?
before
Great.
he unloaded
Yep.
that fearsome swing.
Yep.
So here's another question. This is from Sebastian in Boston. The question is, how do you balance the kind of internal competition, for places in the lineup? So obviously, you have to get your guys competing against one another, versus trying to create that positive overall culture that you talked about.
That, what we do is, and this can be in any walk of life or any business, is we want this competition to raise the level for everybody. We embrace that competition. We talk about it like we're competing on the field, and we're brothers off the field. And we want guys that are competing against each other for a starting position to help them raise each other's level, because that's going to help the team be more successful. And it comes down, again, it comes back to just valuing people and valuing everyone in your organization for what they do and for their role, and recognizing it. So if a guy is working extremely hard and competing with another player, and the other player gets a starting position in that game, we still want to acknowledge that player that competed really hard, and we want to tell him, in front of the group, recognize him for what he's been doing, but also privately say, listen, you've done a great job. You've helped raise this level, this whole team, and be patient. Your time is going to come.
So when you're making player evaluations, are you mostly doing it just, I see what I see, I and the team of coach, your assistant coaches, or, to what extent do you look at analytics, and if you do, what are the analytics that are
analytics play a big role in what we do to support decisions. I think our eye, the eye test is important, and we have a number of staff members to help out with that. But then there's also analytics. We can create player profiles in each position, and then we can match that up with what they're doing at their clubs and say, okay, who best fits what we want to do in our playing system, who best fits that based on the data. And then it's about trying it and seeing if they do fit in, and then continue to work with it. But physical data is important, technical data is important, and we mix all of that to help us make informed decisions.
So here's another question from the audience. This is from Jeff from San Antonio, Texas, and I think it's both a general question, but also specific in the context that you're living in right now. So, what's your advice or strategy in dealing with difficult conversations?
Great question. Don't shy away from them. And I think that's key. It's about, looking those difficult conversations in the face and going through with it and having them. Sometimes it's really painful to have conversations, but you need to do that. If a player is not starting a game, the last thing a coach should do is shy away from telling him why and what he can do to get on the field, even though it's a difficult conversation, because the player is going to be upset. So for us as a staff, we acknowledge that some conversations may be more difficult, but we do face them, and we do have those conversations because it's important.
Do you wish you'd handled any of the conversations differently, during the World Cup or since then? And I'm alluding to the controversy that you're dealing with now. Do you have any regrets or wish you'd handled anything differently?
I mean, it's a good question, and we're always looking to improve. We're always reflecting and saying, okay, how do we get better? How do we improve? I guess when you reference the Howe Institute, and when you reference that talk, and although you said it wasn't about a player, it was more about the team and their response. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have told that story. It brought too much unwarranted attention to an overall shining example of team culture and teamwork. And so that would be something that I would go back and change for sure.
Yeah, even though, again, 200 of us in the room walked away without any feeling that you'd thrown anybody under the bus or anything like that. So I'll just mention that. So in the business world, we talk all the time about failure being a teacher. Failure in competitive sports, is losing. And that's hard to swallow. But do you have a kind of a culture or an approach to having productive losses that teach you something going forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is where the process comes into play. If you don't have a process in professional sports and you're only worried about results, or focused on results, I should say, then by that definition, you can't make any progress with a loss. But if you do have a process where it's about learning, it's about reflecting, it's about improving, then you can take just as much from a loss, sometimes more than you can from a win. And so for losses, we really, the one thing I can't stand is when after the game, where you're eating and everyone's heads down after a loss and they're not talking to each other. I say, guys, listen, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, right? The sun is going to rise. And for us, it's about how do we learn from this experience and how do we use this experience to get better? And so, it's wins and losses. It's pretty much the same attitude. How do you get better from wins and losses? How do you evaluate what you're doing and look to improve it?
So you have experience, as I said in the beginning, both as a player and a coach in Europe and in the United States. I'd be interested in your thoughts on, obviously the games are different or the settings are different, but kind of the cultural differences. And, this may get at what does the U.S. need to do to get to that higher level? So any thoughts on kind of relevant differences between the European game and the U.S. game at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting there. If you think about the progress we've made over these last 25 years, I'm not sure there are many countries that have made that steep of progress over the last 25 years. So we're getting there. The next step is to become an essential part of the American landscape. So soccer becomes essential, where every kid that grows up wants to play soccer because he sees this pathway to a great profession. And in Europe, you have that more. Every kid's grown up. When my kids were in Europe, I'll use my son as an example. He'd walk to school, his buddies would be talking about soccer. During recess, they play soccer. After school, they walk home, they talk about soccer. At night, there's a soccer game on TV. Like, it's all inclusive. And it's that essential part of the society that I really think is the difference maker. But having said that, Major League Soccer, U.S. soccer has made a ton of progress over these last 25 years. And if we continue on this pathway, we will see the day when soccer is essential to the American landscape.
Since we're talking about the international landscape, I have to ask you, your thoughts on Pele, who just, passed away in recent days. You must have met him over the years. I mean, any stories or any thoughts about the great Pele?
Yeah, first of all, it was a sad day for soccer worldwide when Pele passed. Amazing individual, amazing ambassador of the game. But not only that, a great player. I remember growing up and watching him at the Cosmo games. We had a relationship. Our club team had a relationship with him and Professor Mazet, and they brought us over to Brazil. We went to his house in Brazil. And my WhatsApp picture, the profile picture, is Pele in front and me behind him at a press conference when they're announcing that trip. So I must have been 12 or 13 years old. So it was watching video. I remember specifically watching training videos of him and just being in awe, and then seeing him on the field, and he was one of the greats, I think, in any sport. So the world will miss him for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Here's a question from Joshua from Lexington. I'm assuming Lexington, Mass. Could be Lexington, Kentucky, or somewhere. It's an interesting question to me. So, when I talk to business leaders, they have their deputies and their staff often for years, and sometimes, certainly in the old days, for an entire career. You have your players for a limited amount of time, sometimes a very short amount of time. So how does that affect your leadership? How do you think about the kind of transient nature of these relationships, which most of us don't face?
Yeah, it needs a little more work, right? There needs more communication because you don't have them all the time. So there's this time in between that you need to bridge. You don't want communication to go away completely, and you need to keep up that communication. We're watching the players all the time, so we get to see their games and giving them feedback and just keeping keeping that communication going is important. And then to me, it's just being very clear with the vision and always resetting the vision. So every time they come in camp, it's like, the first meeting is a refresher. Okay, here's where we are. Here's what we're focused on. Here are the objectives of this camp. Let's go. Here's our vision of what we want to do as a program, and let's go. And then finally, from a teaching standpoint, just realizing that you have very limited time, and it's almost like you're focused on the big picture. That's the most important thing in each camp, is the big picture. And then some of the details you have to let go because you just don't have the time.
So we're almost out of time, and I appreciate your being willing to talk about anything and everything. The last, few days must have been, tough for you. I mean, again, it started with something reported that wasn't meant to be reported, and it was kind of mischaracterized anyway. And then, kind of a blackmail threat. I mean, I none of us can really imagine what you're going through right now. But maybe that's my last question. What are you going through? How are you coping with this specifically, and how are you holding up? And how do you get through day by day by day?
Yeah, I mean, I have a strong family, and I have a very supportive family. And what I mentioned in the beginning is, like, again, to me, it's about my wife. It's about feeling for her, because, again, it was her story. And, I feel, tremendously bad that, my profession had to bring this to the public light, because, but having said that, we're strong, and we keep going. And, and that's what it's about for me now. It's just how to move forward, keep moving forward. And take it day by day. But it's a strong family. We received a lot of support, a lot of great messages from people that have known our family for years, and just keep going.
So, Gregg, I want to thank you for doing this. It was really thrilling watching you, lead that amazing team in the World Cup. The whole world was watching and was riding the roller coaster with you, and it was I think you made America proud. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Hope it all settles down for you. But anyway, it's really nice to have a conversation.
Thank you, Adi. Thanks for having me.
All right. So thanks everyone who tuned in today. Tune in next week, The New World of Work. This will be actually Wednesday, January 11th at 12 noon Eastern Time, when my guest will be Claudio Descalzi, who is the CEO of Eni, the Italian oil giant. We're talking about how the Russian attack on Ukraine has roiled European energy markets. We'll talk about how companies like Eni are trying to keep up with demand. We'll also talk about what it means to be committed to a zero carbon future while running a fossil fuel giant. So join us then. Until now, I'm Adi Ignatius. This is The New World of Work.